Good morning, children. Welcome to our English class. Today we are going to read Unit-5, Section 2, The Time Machine, written by H. G. Wells. But before we move ahead, let us first read about the author. Herbert George Wells was an English writer who was born on 21st September in Bromley, England. At 18, he won a scholarship to the Royal College of Science, London, and went on to become a biology teacher for some time. Interested in writing, he became instantly famous with the publication of The Time Machine. A series of science fiction novels followed, including The Invisible Man, The First Men in the Moon, and The War of the Worlds, that established him as a writer of outstanding originality. Prolific in many genres, he wrote dozens of novels, short stories, and works of social commentary, history, satire, biography, and autobiography. His work also included two books on recreational war games. Herbert displayed remarkable powers of prophecy, especially in his non-fiction works, foretelling the rise of major cities and suburbs, economic globalization, and future military conflicts, including the creation of atomic bombs. Several of his works have been made into films even in recent times. A remake of War of the Worlds in 2005 featured Tom Cruise and Dakota Fanning as two of the humans fighting to survive an alien invasion. Wells' first published book was a textbook of biology. With his first novel, The Time Machine, which was immediately successful, he began a series of science fiction novels that revealed him as a writer of marked originality. Children, now let us come to page number 184, section 2, The Time Machine. Do you enjoy traveling? Discuss with your partner your most memorable trip either within the country or overseas. Imagine what it would be like to travel into the past or the future. If time travel was possible, which period of time would you like to visit and why? In the story below, we will meet the inventor of a time machine. The time traveler's grey eyes shone and twinkled, and his usually pale face was flushed and animated. The fire burned brightly, and its soft radiance caught the bubbles that flashed and sparkled in our glasses as we sat around listening to him after a very satisfying dinner. For some time now, said the time traveler, I have been playing with an idea that struck me some time ago. To create a machine that could enable me to travel through time. To travel through time? Scoffed the very young man. What an imagination you have! A machine, repeated the time traveler, that shall travel indifferently in any direction of space and time, as the driver determines. Philby laughed out loud. But I have experimental verification, said the time traveler. Experimental verification? Cried I. You are going to verify that? Yes, I intend to, he responded confidently. Let's see your experiment then, said the psychologist. Though it's a humbug, you know. The time traveler smiled round at us. Then, still smiling faintly, and with his hands deep in his trouser pockets, he walked slowly out of the room, and we heard his slippers shuffling down the long passage to his laboratory. Children, the story begins with a description of the time traveler. The author, H. G. Wells, says the time traveler, who earlier looked pale and sorrowful, is today glowing with excitement and seemed to be full of life. The warm light of the fire made the room warm and cozy, as the author, along with other people, surrounded to listen to the time traveler after having a satisfying dinner. The time traveler said that from a long time, an idea is continuously striking him, which is to create a machine that could make him travel through time, either backwards or forward. To travel through time, scoffed the very young man. What an imagination you have! The author says that many of the guests believed that the time traveler was a man who loved to play pranks. So the guests ridiculed and mocked at him. A machine, repeated the time traveler, that shall travel indifferently in any direction of space and time as the driver determines. After hearing this, Philby laughed out loud. The time traveler quoted that he wanted to invent a machine that will make us travel in any direction of space and time, be it backwards or forward. After hearing this, Philby made fun of him. But I have experimental verification, said the time traveler. The time traveler said that I need to confirm the truth through practical application. Yes, I intend to, he responded confidently. When one of the guests asked him that are you going to make it happen really, he said that yes, I intend to, I want to. Let's see your experiment then, said the psychologist. Though it's all humbug, you know. Now nobody in the room was ready to believe the time traveler, and they were making fun of him, they were mocking at him. In fact, the psychologist said that all right, we are ready to see your experiment, which we know is just nonsense. The time traveler smiled round at us. Then, still smiling faintly and with his hands deep in his trouser pockets, he walked slowly out of the room, and we heard his slippers shuffling down the long passage to his laboratory. The time traveler very casually then left the room smiling with his hands in his trouser pockets and moved towards his laboratory. The psychologist looked at us. I wonder what he's got. Some silly trick or other, said the medical man. And Philby tried to tell us about the magician he had seen when he was a little boy. But before he had finished his story, the time traveler came back. The thing the time traveler held in his hand was a glittering metallic object, scarcely larger than a small clock, and very delicately made. There was ivory in it and some transparent crystalline substance. He took one of the small tables that was scattered about the room and set it in front of the fire. On this table, he placed the device. Then he drew up a chair and sat down. The only other object on the table was a small shaded lamp, the bright light of which fell full upon the model. There were also perhaps a dozen candles about in brass candlesticks upon the mantel, so that the room was brilliantly illuminated. I sat in a low armchair nearest the fire, and I drew this forward so as to be almost between the time traveler and the fireplace. Philby sat behind him, looking over his shoulder. The medical man and the provincial mayor watched him in profile from the right, the psychologist from the left. The very young man stood behind the psychologist. We were all on the alert. It did not seem possible that he would be able to play a trick on us in any way. The moment the time traveler went towards his laboratory, people started making fun of him. The psychologist said that he really wondered what he is going to show them. commented the medical man, that obviously is going to show us some silly trick or another. And Philby, he made even the fun of Philby by saying that he will tell us about a magician that he saw when he was a little boy. But before they could finish their conversation, the time traveler came back. But this time he had something in his hand. It was a sparkling and shining metallic object, scarcely larger than a small clock, which is little larger than a small clock, and very delicately made. There was ivory in it and some transparent crystal substance. The time traveler then placed the device on a small table just in front of the fire. He then drew up a chair and sat down. The only object on the table was a small shaded lamp, the bright light of which fell full upon the model. There were also perhaps a dozen candles about in brass candlesticks upon the mantel, so that the room was brilliantly illuminated. The narrator sat in a low armchair next to the fire and drove himself forward so as to be almost between the time traveler and the fireplace. Philby sat behind him, looking over his shoulder. Philby sat behind the time traveler and looking over his shoulder. The medical man and the provincial mayor watched him in profile from the right, the psychologist from the left. Children, everybody in the room, they were very eager to find out what the time traveler is going to show them. The very young man stood behind the psychologist. We were all on the alert. It did not seem possible that he would be able to play a trick on us in any way, and this time they were not ready to take any prank from him. Alright, children, that's all for today. I would be meeting you again in my next video with the remaining part of the story. Till then, take care. Thanks for watching.